So dual engine flameouts can be a very demanding and unforgiving emergency for any pilot or crew, and it's no time to be shooting from the hip. Let's look at a fuel contamination event that happened to a Citation pilot.
Okay, so we're climbing through 16,000 feet. We see fuel filter bypass left and right. That's not a good sign. Possible contaminated fuel, so this certainly makes us think that we could be experiencing an engine failure soon. Of course, we would run the proper checklist here, but we know because we've been briefed ahead of time that we're not going to have enough time to get to that checklist because the engines are going to quit any second now. Okay, we have both engines spooled back. Of course, we have memory items for this. We want to make sure our battery is in the bat position. We're going to take our throttles, we're going to put them in the cutoff position, we're going to pick our favorite engine, hit the starter, and bring that throttle to idle. Now, while we're doing this, it also behooves us to remember we always want to fly the airplane first and foremost. So I want to start a turn back. I know that generally speaking, if I take off in more or less ISA conditions, until I get up to 20 to 30,000 feet, I'm going to be climbing at a steeper angle than the plane will glide. Most of our Citations that our members are flying have about a 12-to-1 glide ratio. Nice thing about 12-to-1, that's 2 nautical miles per 1,000 feet of altitude. So from 16,000 feet, I can glide 32 miles. I can see that I'm pretty close to that in terms of my distance to Wichita. I can get myself centered back towards Wichita, get a rough heading, get myself in this 130 to 140 speed that we'll see in a second, depending on my weight, is going to typically be about my best glide speed. Now, I did my memory items. It doesn't look like anything worked there, so of course the next appropriate step would be to pull out the checklist. So after I've completed my memory items and verified that I've completed those, I'm going to make sure my engine ice switches are off. I'm going to turn my air conditioning off so I can try the opposite engine start. I can hit my right starter, I can bring my throttle up to idle, I can attempt to see if maybe I can get this engine started. If neither engine is going to start, then my next action is to go to EMER so that I can preserve as much of that battery power as I think I can get. Now the checklist is going to direct me to tab A6, which is the next page over, because this is going to be my maximum glide emergency landing checklist. Now this is the first time I see my best glide speeds displayed, so this is a good thing to just be familiar with in the airplane, is have a sense of what your best glide speeds are. I knew I took off pretty close to max takeoff weight, so as I said, in that range of 130 to 140 is going to be right around where I am for 8,000 pounds. So now I'm flying that speed, my flap handle is up. We can see that I'm descending 1,500 feet per minute or so, so I've got some time. You know, from 16,000 feet, we've got a good 10 minutes to run through this procedure. It certainly is going to be adrenalized, certainly is not going to be a very fun experience, but it does not have to be a rushed, panicked experience. Make sure my speed brakes are retracted. I want to make sure my landing gear handle is up. Of course, I've already declared emergency to ATC at this point. Make sure my throttles are in the cutoff position, fuel transfer is off, and bat switch has already been in the EMER position. If I didn't have a reverted emergency display here, of course I would do it at this point. Now if I take my altitude selector and I move my altitude selector down to roughly the field elevation of the airport I'm trying to return to, I can see with my range selector whether it looks like, based on my current ground speed and current descent rate, I'm going to make it to my airport or not. If I see that range ring is well before my airport, I know I probably need to reconsider whether I'm going to make it back to my intended airport of landing. So continuing with my checklist, we have to remember that when we've lost both of our engines, we've lost a lot more than just propulsion. We've lost both of our electrical sources, so therefore we're now on emergency power with the consequent loss of a lot of our normal functions. We've lost our pressurization. Were we at higher altitude, our cabin would start climbing. Now the good news is the outflow valve is going to close, and you can actually see that we still haven't even received a cabin altitude warning yet, because the cabin will leak, but with the outflow valve closing, trying to trap some of that pressure in, again, at a lower altitude like 16,000 feet, we don't have to worry about having a fast cabin altitude rise. With the loss of normal electrical system, the checklist is now going to talk us through making a landing based on an abnormal flat position. It's going to remind us we don't have access to our icing. It's going to remind us that we have lost power to our hydraulics in this particular aircraft, which means our normal landing gear extension procedure is not going to work. So at the appropriate point here, we're going to need to do our emergency gear extension procedure. So as I'm flying here, I'm just trying to keep the plane as trimmed as possible because of course my workload is very high here. I'd like to be able to look away from the PFD for a second or two and know that the plane's going to again be flying that 135, 140 for my weight that's going to be about the optimal glide speed. Okay, I've already confirmed with my weight and the flaps up, I'm going to have an approach speed a little bit faster of 113. If I get down in great VMC conditions and I haven't been up in the air for a real long time, you know, I could think about on short final trying to put my battery back in the bat position. It's certainly not going to make anything worse. Again, on short final in a VMC condition, I'm not going to risk losing too much at that point. So now again, just trying to maintain that optimal glide speed, keeping an eye on where my range altitude select shows. Still looking good, still looking like at this sync rate I'm going to have no problem making it to the airport, but certainly ready to consider other options should that need to arise. If we do not have our battery sufficiently remaining that we could select the normal bat position again, of course we're also going to not have our normal braking. So we have to be thinking about our emergency braking procedures. Of course, using the minimum amount of force, selecting the longest runway possible. In this case, we have the combination of zero flaps and emergency braking, really going to drive home that need for a long runway. Now, in a perfect world, if we could set up to be on a high downwind, a beam, the numbers of our landing runway, you know, maybe a good 3,000 feet above the airport, that would be comfortable. That would give us some time to plan the descent. But in some situations, if it looks like you're kind of right on the edge of making it to the airport, sometimes, unfortunately, you might have to consider a downwind landing. We've already told ATC what's happened. We've declared an emergency. We're telling them that, you know, at this point, we'd be thinking about probably landing to the east, coming in from this direction, not looking like we've got enough altitude to try to do a full pattern and come back around. Remember that in an emergency, the options are yours. So the winds on the surface would dictate, do I want to set up for a left base to land to the northeast, or do I want to set up for a right base to land to the southwest? As I said, I think we're going to land to the northeast. As I approach the runway and feel comfortable about my altitude, I can start to aim a little bit off the center of the airport to be setting up more properly for the base position. Got to think about where I want to put my gear down. The procedure is going to involve a couple of steps, so I don't want to wait too late to put the gear down, but at the same time, I also don't want to put the gear down too early and risk losing that ability to make it to the runway. I can certainly prep as much as I can. And feeling like I've comfortably got the airport made here, we can go ahead with our emergency gear extension procedure. I'm not going to bother pulling the circuit breaker in a single pilot situation. Okay, I see my 3 green. And now, you know, I'm just thinking about some S-turns as necessary. Remember, the entire airport is yours. Hopefully by this point, as we say, you've had a good 10 minutes at this point to have ATC clear the airport. If you need to land on a taxiway, land on a taxiway. If you need to land on the grass, land on the grass. The entire airport is yours at this point. What you really want to be thinking about is getting everybody off of the airplane safely. That's far more important than exactly where you touch down. All right, as we line up with the runway, we know that our airspeed is a little bit faster than normal, but again, affecting a safe outcome, even if it results in some blown tires, is more important than that. We're going to use our emergency brake cautiously. We see 4,000 feet of runway remaining. I see that with light pressure, I've got a good deceleration. Key point there is I'm not aiming to touch down in an engine out situation on the 1,000-foot marks. I'm aiming to touch down well down the runway so that if I err on the side of thinking I've got more space than I do, then maybe I touch down at the 1,000-foot mark. If I aim for the 1,000-foot mark, I might end up touching down short of the runway. Over the last few years, fuel contamination events have caused several dual-engine flameouts in turbojet aircraft, sometimes without the ability to restart an engine. You should always be vigilant and alert to this event, and it's a great procedure to practice the next time you're in the sim.
Great advice, Neil. Watching our video series will help prepare you for a challenging flight. Check them all out under the Safety tab at CitationJetPilots.com.